Welcome, welcome. You're here at Vision Harry. Today we present to you, Fleur's Veela grandmother scanned Harry and discovered 26 core blocks and demanded Wizengamot trial. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Scan. The Yule Ball was everything Hogwarts knew how to be when it decided to show off. Every chandelier in the Great Hall burned gold rather than its usual cool white, and someone, probably Flitwick, drunk on the occasion, had charmed the ceiling to cycle through a slow aurora of deep blue and violet rather than reflecting the actual Scottish sky, which was doing its usual December thing of being aggressively grey and threatening sleet. The house tables were gone, replaced by round ones draped in silver cloth, and the enchanted candles floated lower than usual, close enough to the centerpiece flower arrangements that you kept expecting something to catch fire. Nothing ever did. That was the magic of it. Harry Potter stood near the entrance to the hall in his dress robes, the ones Hermione had bullied him into borrowing from a fourth-year Hufflepuff whose shoulders matched his, because the maroon ones Mrs. Weasley had sent were, in Ron's own words, an act of war against the concept of color, and felt approximately as comfortable as a man attending his own trial. Parvati Patil was on his arm. She was, by any objective measure, stunning. Deep rose robes, dark hair piled up in an elaborate arrangement of braids and fresh flowers, and a smile that had turned 3 Ravenclaw fifth-years into stumbling idiots in the last 10 minutes alone. She was also, Harry could tell from the way her eyes kept sliding sideways toward the Gryffindor table, deeply unimpressed with him as a date. He couldn't blame her. He'd forgotten to compliment her robes until Hermione had hissed at him. He'd already stepped on her left foot twice. "You could at least pretend to be enjoying yourself," Parvati murmured, not unkindly. "I am enjoying myself. You look like you're calculating how quickly you could reach the exit." 11 seconds, Harry said. "Maybe 8 if I go through the side door near the Hufflepuff banners." She laughed despite herself, which made him feel marginally better. The champions' table was at the front of the hall, raised slightly on a low dais, and Harry could see it from where he stood. Cedric Diggory was already seated, golden and easy, Cho Chang laughing at something he'd said. Crumb sat with his arms folded and his expression suggesting he found the entire concept of fun personally offensive, while Hermione beside him was flushed and radiant in her periwinkle robes and seemed to have temporarily forgotten she owned more than 4 books. And then there was Fleur. Fleur Delacour had clearly decided that if the occasion demanded she dress up, she would do so in a manner that constituted an aggressive act against everyone else in the room. Her robes were silver white, cut to move with her rather than simply hang, and her hair was down, really down, not styled or pinned or arranged but simply falling, like it had made a decision about itself and was committed. Even from across the hall she had that quality Harry had noticed in the hallways, that Veela shimmer that wasn't quite visible but that your eyes kept returning to, the way a fire draws attention even when you're not cold. She caught him looking. He looked away. He had no idea what expression had been on his face. "Come on," he said to Parvati. "Let's go sit down." The meal was good. This was the thing about Hogwarts that Harry genuinely loved: when the school decided to feed you, it committed. There was soup with actual cream and actual herbs, there was roast everything, there was a sort of layered chocolate thing for dessert that Ron ate 2 servings of and then went quiet and contemplative, the way he always did when confronted with truly excellent food. Harry ate more than he expected to. The food helped. The noise helped. After 2 years of Dursley Christmases spent in his room with crackers pushed through the door, there was something in the heat and the noise and the sheer abundance of it that reached some part of him he didn't usually examine. He was on his 3rd pumpkin pasty and something approaching genuine enjoyment when the Beauxbatons delegation arrived at the table beside theirs. The French students moved the way their school had trained them to, with a sort of deliberate elegance that wasn't arrogance exactly, more like they'd been told from a young age that they were worth watching and had simply incorporated the information. They were accompanied by Madame Maxime, who was conducting herself with the serene authority of a woman twice the size of anyone who might challenge her, and behind Madame Maxime, in a gown the color of champagne, was a woman Harry didn't recognize. He recognized her immediately, in the way you recognize the original when you've only ever seen the copy. Apollon Delacour was perhaps 40, perhaps not quite, and she had the quality of someone who had never needed age to be interesting. She was Fleur's mother in the same way a cathedral is related to the church built on the same ground, same bones, larger scale, more weight behind the eyes. She moved through the crowded hall without touching anyone, and yet somehow the crowd moved for her, the way water moves around something that belongs in it. She was seated 2 tables over. Harry returned to his pasty. He was not, therefore, watching when Apollon Delacour made her way to the champions' table between courses and bent to kiss her daughter's cheeks and exchange rapid, affectionate French with her. He was not watching when Fleur stood and began making introductions along the table, Cedric, who stood and bowed in a way that was so naturally charming it was almost annoying, Crumb, who nodded without standing, Hermione, who attempted French and was rewarded with a warm smile. He only looked up when someone said his name. "And this is Harry Potter," Fleur said, with the particular quality she always gave his name, like there were more letters in it than strictly necessary. He stood. Extended his hand. "Mrs. Delacour. It's nice to meet you." Apollon Delacour took his hand. What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds. Her fingers closed around his. Her expression, which had been the polite warmth of a woman who has met many of her daughter's acquaintances and found them mostly acceptable, went very still. Not blank. Still, the way a hunting animal goes still when it scents something wrong. Her eyes, which were the same shade as Fleur's but about 20 years more experienced, dropped to their joined hands and then came back up to his face. Her thumb pressed, just slightly, into the back of his hand. Harry felt nothing unusual. A faint warmth, maybe. The kind of thing you'd attribute to the fire being close. "Mr. Potter," she said, and her voice was perfectly composed. "It is a pleasure." She released his hand. She smiled at him. She returned to her table. Fleur watched her mother go with a slight frown that she smoothed away before anyone else noticed it. Apollon did not return to her table. She stood beside it for a moment, one hand resting on the back of her chair, and then she walked, not hurriedly, but with the kind of directional certainty that meant she was going somewhere specific, along the edge of the hall and through the side door near the Hufflepuff banners. Harry watched this, absently, because he'd spent 11 years watching adults move through rooms and learning to read the difference between purposeful and aimless. That was purposeful. He didn't think about it again until Professor McGonagall appeared at his elbow 20 minutes later and said, in her most neutral voice, the one that meant she was feeling something she'd decided not to show, "Mr. Potter. Would you come with me, please?" It wasn't a question. The room McGonagall led him to was one of those Hogwarts spaces that existed off the map, not the Marauder's map, which Harry had memorized, but off the conceptual map, the one you build after years in a building. It was a sitting room of sorts, with chairs that looked genuinely old rather than deliberately antique, and a fire that had clearly been burning for a long time. The castle doing its castle thing, Harry thought, already knowing when to expect company. Apollon Delacour was standing by the window. She turned when they entered. McGonagall closed the door and stood in front of it, which Harry noted. "It is important," Apollon said. Not interrupting exactly, overlapping, gently but unmistakably. Her English was accented but precise. "I would not ask otherwise. I do not make a habit of pulling young men from celebrations without cause." She looked at Harry directly. "I would like your permission to perform a scan." Harry blinked. "A scan. A heritage scan. Veela tradition. It is not a common practice outside our culture and I do not expect you to be familiar with it." She said this without condescension, simply cataloging information. "When I touched your hand, I noticed something. Something I would like to look at more closely." "What kind of something?" "The kind that should not be there." She paused. "I will not lie to you, Mr. Potter. Whatever I find, I will tell you truthfully. You will not be kept in the dark. This I promise." Harry looked at McGonagall. McGonagall's expression was carefully arranged, but her jaw was doing the thing where it tightened slightly at the hinge, the tell Harry had identified in second year when she was worried but didn't want him to know she was worried. "Is it dangerous?" he asked. "The scan. To you?" "No. To my peace of mind, possibly." Something about the honesty of that landed well. Harry thought about it for about 4 seconds, the hesitation was more form than substance, he'd already decided, and then nodded. "All right." Apollon had him sit in the chair nearest the fire. She stood before him and did something with her hands that wasn't quite wand work, or rather, it began with wand work, a complex series of motions that Harry couldn't follow, and then the wand seemed to become secondary as her hands moved through the space around him. The Veela shimmer was stronger here, in the small room with the firelight, less a quality and more a visible thing, like heat rising from summer tarmac. Harry felt warm. Then he felt strange. Not unpleasant, more like the moment when your eyes adjust in a dark room and shapes that were invisible resolve into furniture. Something in the air between them began to glow. He looked at it. It was gold, mostly, with threads of something deeper, a dark red that reminded him, obscurely, of the color the sky went sometimes in late August, when summer hadn't quite admitted it was over. The threads moved. Apollon was very quiet. After a minute, the threads began to show interruptions. Places where the gold dimmed, where the dark red went gray and thin. Harry counted them without meaning to, the way you count cracks in a ceiling when you can't sleep. He lost count. He started again. He reached 23 before Apollon made a sound, not quite a word, more the sound a person makes when they've confirmed something they'd hoped was wrong. She kept scanning. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. When she finally lowered her hands, the light faded. She stood looking at him for a moment. Her expression was composed, it was very clearly, very deliberately composed, in the way that a person composes themselves when the alternative would be to show something they're not ready to show in front of someone who's already been through enough. 26, she said. McGonagall made a sound. A very small, very sharp sound, like a word that didn't make it all the way out. Harry looked between them. What's 26? Blocks, Apollon said. Suppressions. Magical limiters, some external, some deeply embedded. Some crude, some, she stopped. Chose her words. Some very sophisticated. Some placed there by someone who knew precisely what they were doing. The fire crackled. On me, Harry said. On you. He sat with that for a moment. He was 14 years old and he had, in those 14 years, been told he was slow to show magic, that his magic was unstable, that his results were adequate, that he had potential but hadn't quite, and he had believed it, mostly, in the way you believe the water you're swimming in is the only water there is. How many, he started, and his voice came out completely normal, which surprised him. How many is normal? For a person to have? 0, Apollon said. A newborn might carry 1 or 2 residual traces from very difficult births. It fades within weeks. A healthy magical child carries none. 26, he said again. 26. He looked at the fire. A log shifted and sent up a brief column of sparks. McGonagall had not moved from the door. Some of them are old, Apollon continued. Pre-Hogwarts. Placed on an infant, or a very young child. Something moved through her voice then, not quite fury, too controlled for that, but adjacent to it, banked behind the professionalism. Others are more recent. Within the last 3 years. Someone's been adding them, Harry said. Someone has been adding them, she confirmed. The implication settled into the room and they all breathed around it for a moment. Can they be removed, he asked. Yes. Not all at once, that could be dangerous, the magic would need to rebalance, but yes. They can be removed. She held his gaze. But that is not something that can happen quietly, Mr. Potter. What was done to you, the scale of it, the deliberateness, this is a crime. Under both French magical law and British. And I will not pretend I did not see what I saw. She let that land, then added, more gently, I am sorry to place this weight on you on a night that should have been enjoyable. It's all right, Harry said, which was not entirely accurate but was the thing he knew how to say. No, Apollon said, with a precision that stopped him. It is not all right. And I would like you to stop pretending it is, at least in this room, because what was done to you is not something a person should be calm about. The fire crackled again. Harry looked at her. This woman he had met approximately 45 minutes ago, who was looking at him with the specific look, he catalogued it slowly, not quite sure of his identification, that he associated with McGonagall when the deputy headmistress thought he wasn't watching. The look that meant I see you and I am angry on your behalf and I am going to do something about it. Who did it? He asked. That, Apollon said, is what the scan cannot tell us precisely. Some I can identify by the magical signature, the older ones carry traces of very specific methodology. The recent additions are more careful. Deliberately obscured. She tucked her wand away. But there are people at the ministry with equipment that can determine it definitively. And I intend to put them to work. The ministry, McGonagall said, and there was something careful in her voice. The Wizengamot, Apollon said calmly. I have standing to request an emergency session. The Delacour family holds French ministry rank sufficient to trigger the International Charter on Magical Welfare of Minors. Mr. Potter is a minor. What was done to him falls well within that charter. She said it all with the tone of someone reciting a route they've already mapped. I have been considering who I will call first since I left that table. Harry looked at her. You've already decided to do this. I decided when I reached 23 and it became apparent that the count wasn't stopping. She met his eyes. But I will not proceed without your agreement. You are the injured party. This is your decision. McGonagall spoke from the door, and her voice had lost the careful arrangement. What was underneath was iron. I would very much like to advise you to agree, Mr. Potter. Harry thought about Dumbledore, who had placed him with the Dursleys and called it protection. He thought about Snape, who had spent 3 years ensuring that Harry felt useless in potions. He thought about the Chamber of Secrets and the Dementors and the Triwizard Cup and all the ways that he had always felt just slightly less than what a situation required, like he was always running on fewer cylinders than he should have been. 26. 26 blocks. Do it, he said. Something in Apollon Delacour's expression changed. Not relaxed, sharpened. The way a blade sharpens when it finds the angle it's been looking for. Bien, she said quietly. Then let us begin. McGonagall stayed in the room while Apollon made her first mirror call. Harry listened to the rapid French. He caught nothing specific but the tone was unmistakable, a person assembling forces, calling in debts, making requests that were not quite requests. Who is she calling? He asked McGonagall, quietly. Her husband, I expect. First. Then, if she has the contacts I suspect she has, Madame Bones. Amelia Bones. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The same. McGonagall looked at him. Her expression was doing several things at once. Mr. Potter, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. Okay. Did you know any of it? Even a suspicion? He thought about it properly rather than answering immediately, because the question deserved it. I knew I wasn't, I always thought I wasn't as good as people seemed to expect. And everyone kept saying I had potential but I kept just barely managing things. I thought it was me. He paused. Not that someone had, I never thought that. McGonagall looked away. Out the window at the dark Scottish grounds. Her jaw was doing the thing again. Professor, Harry said. Did you know? No. The word came out with force behind it, like something that had been held and then released. No, I did not. I want to be very clear about that. He believed her. He wasn't sure about everyone else, he'd have to be very clear about that with. Apollon finished her first call and began her second. This one was shorter, sharper. More English syllables mixed into the French. A name he caught, Amelia. Confirming the theory. Fleur appeared at the door 20 minutes later, slightly breathless, her silver-white gown catching the firelight in a way that made the light better. She looked at her mother. Then at Harry. Then at her mother again. Maman, she said carefully. Tu es si que esi passé. Apollon covered the mirror with her hand and turned. She spoke to her daughter in French that was too fast and too quiet for Harry to track, but he watched Fleur's face. Watched the polite social expression drop away. Watched something colder and more real settle in underneath it. Fleur's eyes moved to Harry and the look in them was, he didn't have a word for it exactly, but it was the look of someone recalculating something. 26. Fleur said, in English, sharply. 26, her mother confirmed. Fleur turned to Harry. Are you all right? People keep asking me that, Harry said. People will keep asking until you give an answer that isn't I'm fine. I'm angry, he said, because Apollon had told him not to pretend, and because it was true, and because something about Fleur's directness made evasion feel pointless. I'm angry in a way that I don't quite know what to do with yet. Fleur looked at him for a moment. Good, she said. Stay that way. It will be useful. By midnight, the Yule Ball was winding down. Harry could hear it, faintly, the change in the music as the orchestra shifted to slower pieces. Beyond the door, Hogwarts was rearranging itself towards sleep. In here, Apollon was on her fourth mirror call and Harry had drunk 2 cups of tea that McGonagall had conjured and Fleur had taken a seat beside him and was explaining, quietly and with more patience than he previously attributed to her, what a Veela heritage scan actually was. We see magical architecture, she said. The way a core is structured, how the magic flows, where it pools, how it expresses. Every person's magic has a pattern. Like, she considered, her brows drawing together slightly. Like a fingerprint, but in 3 dimensions. We can see where it's been interrupted. Damaged. Covered over. Can everyone do it? He asked. Veela, yes. A full Veela could do it at a glance without trying. My mother is half, but she has spent 40 years developing the instinct. I can do it, but it takes longer and I am less precise. She paused. When we shook hands at the opening ceremony, I noticed something. I thought perhaps I was wrong. Harry looked at her. You noticed. She met his eyes. I noticed. I said nothing because I was not certain and because, she stopped. Because I told myself it was not my place. I regret that. Harry opened his mouth to say it's all right, and then closed it again, because Apollon had told him not to, and because Fleur's expression suggested she'd find the automatic reassurance insulting. What did you notice? He asked instead. That your magic was, compressed. Like someone had folded something very large into a space that was too small for it. She frowned at the middle distance. And that the compression felt external. Not natural. Not your own architecture doing it. Something very large, he repeated. Yes. She looked at him steadily. Potter, your core, what my mother saw in the scan, the structure of it before the blocks, it is not ordinary. The Potter family carries one of the strongest natural magical signatures in Britain. That is historical fact, not flattery. What was done to you was not simply someone placing limits on a strong wizard. Someone placed limits on, she made a short, expressive gesture with her hand that somehow communicated something quite significant. She's trying to say you would have been terrifying without them, came Apollon's voice from across the room. She had ended her call and was watching them with an expression that had a faint thread of something wry running through it. My daughter is being tactful. It does not come naturally to her. Maman. It is a compliment to you both. Apollon crossed the room. Her heels were quiet on the stone floor. "Mr. Potter. I have spoken to Madame Bones. She has agreed to receive my formal submission tomorrow morning." She was, Apollon paused, not calm about it. "How not calm?" McGonagall asked, from the corner where she had stationed herself with the quiet immovability of someone who has no intention of going anywhere until this is resolved. She said, and I am quoting precisely, "If those blocks carry the signatures I think they might carry, heads will roll." Apollon delivered this with perfect composure. She has the vocabulary of her office. Harry thought about what it meant that the head of magical law enforcement was not calm about it, and decided that it meant things were moving faster than he'd expected. He found he didn't mind. "What happens next?" he asked. "Tomorrow I will file formally. Madame Bones will open an investigation. She will have the scan report, which I have already encoded and copied. She will have her own team of analysts examine it. Once they confirm," Apollon sat down across from him, and there was something about the way she settled into the chair that made him feel she was not done, that this was the part she'd been building toward. "Once they confirm, a Wizengamot session will be called." "A trial," Harry said. "A hearing, technically. But yes. With the evidence I have and with the scope of what was done, it will become a trial before the day is out." She looked at him evenly. "There will be people called to answer for this." "Who?" he asked, and his voice was completely flat, and even he wasn't sure if the flatness was calm or its opposite. "I cannot tell you with certainty until the signatures are analyzed." Her eyes held his. "But I can tell you that one of the more recent blocks carries a methodology that is associated with a very specific style of magic. Deliberate, subtle, expert. The kind of magic that someone performs not in anger but in cold calculation. With the belief that they know better than everyone else what must be done." The fire was the only sound in the room for a moment. Harry thought about a man with half-moon glasses and a long silver beard and a smile that always seemed to know things it wasn't telling. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Apollon looked at him and he could see, quite clearly, that she'd already arrived at the same place. "Get some sleep," she said, not unkindly. "Tomorrow is going to be long. And I need you rested, because I am going to need you to be very, very present." He nodded. Stood. Moved toward the door. "Mr. Potter." Apollon's voice stopped him. He turned. "I want you to understand something," she said. Her voice had lost the professional distance. Underneath it was something older, something that had to do with being a mother and with Veela instinct and with a particular kind of female rage that has no patience for systems that harm children and call it necessity. "What was done to you was not an accident. It was not a side effect. It was not well-intentioned in any sense that I am capable of recognizing. Someone looked at a child and chose to diminish him. And I am going to make very sure that choice has consequences." Harry stood in the doorway and looked at this woman he had met tonight, this woman who had taken his hand at a Yule Ball and felt something wrong and had not looked away from it, and felt something he didn't have quite the right word for. It was somewhere between gratitude and relief and the strange ache of receiving something you hadn't known you were missing. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me yet," she said, with a slight smile. "Thank me when it's done." He went back to Gryffindor Tower. The corridors were emptying, couples drifting upward in various states of the evening's results. Ron would be in a mood about Hermione and Krum. Parvati had, Harry noted distantly, ended up dancing with a Beauxbatons boy and had looked considerably happier for it. He climbed the stairs to the dormitory. Neville was already asleep. Dean and Seamus were conducting a murmured post-mortem of the evening that didn't require his participation. He lay in his bed and stared at the curtains and thought about 26 blocks. Thought about what it meant that he'd spent 14 years running on whatever fraction of himself was left after 26 suppressions, and that he'd still managed, messily, barely, by the skin of his teeth, but still managed, to do the things he'd done. He thought about what he might be like without them. He thought about Apollon's voice saying someone looked at a child and chose to diminish him, and the way the fire had made her eyes look, and the way Fleur had said stay angry, it will be useful, like she was handing him a tool. He stayed angry. It felt, surprisingly, like the most natural thing in the world. Chapter 2, The summons. The castle was different at 6 in the morning. Harry had always known this in a peripheral way. He'd had enough pre-dawn Quidditch practices and enough nights spent staring at ceilings to have catalogued the specific quality of Hogwarts before the student body woke up and turned it into a school again. But this morning the emptiness felt different. Charged. Like the castle itself was holding its breath. He was sitting on the window seat at the end of the fourth-floor corridor, the one with the east-facing view over the Black Lake, when the sun came up. It came up red and slow, dragging itself over the tree line with the reluctance of something that knew today was going to be complicated. The lake was flat and dark beneath it, and Harry watched the color spread across the water and didn't think about anything specific, just let his mind run. He'd slept about 2 hours. Not because of nightmares, the usual suspects hadn't shown up, but because every time he'd started to drift off, some new angle of what Apollon had told him would surface and hook his attention. He'd think about the word blocks, and then he'd think about the first year when Quirrell had told him his magical control was remarkable for someone untrained, and wonder what remarkable meant against the baseline of 26 suppressions. He'd think about third year, about producing a corporeal Patronus at 13 and how Lupin had looked at him after with that expression, that slightly too careful expression, and wonder whether Lupin had known something, had suspected something, had chosen not to ask. That last one had kept him awake longer than the others. The corridor behind him became gradually less empty. A ghost drifted through the far wall, Sir Nicholas, doing his early morning circuit, who gave Harry a surprised look and then a respectful nod, which was unusual enough that Harry filed it. Portraits began stirring, the painted occupants stretching and rearranging themselves. A pair of Ravenclaws came through at 7:15 with the hollow-eyed look of people who had stayed at the ball far too long and were now paying for it. At 7:30, McGonagall appeared at the end of the corridor. She had clearly slept, she was put together in the way that required actual rest, but her eyes were doing the thing. She saw him on the window seat and walked toward him without any of her usual economy of expression. "You're up early," she said, in a tone that meant she'd expected exactly this. "Couldn't sleep." She sat beside him on the window seat. This was unusual enough that Harry straightened slightly. McGonagall sat in chairs. Window seats were for students. They both looked out at the lake for a moment. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Not as your head of house. Personally." "All right." She was quiet for a moment, gathering it. "When you arrived at this school, your file came with notation from Professor Dumbledore recommending that your academic expectations be calibrated. The word used was sensitively, given your non-magical upbringing." Her jaw tightened. "I accepted that at the time. I thought it was reasonable. I am telling you this so you understand that what I accepted and what I should have looked more closely at are not the same thing, and I am aware of the difference." Harry looked at her. "You're apologizing." "I am explaining the limits of what I knew. The apology is included." She met his eyes. "I should have looked more closely. That is what I am saying." He nodded. "Let it sit." "Mrs. Delacour," McGonagall continued, "left for London by Port Key at 5 this morning. She contacted me before she left." A pause. "She is not a woman who does things by halves." "No," Harry agreed. "I noticed. She asked me to tell you that Madame Bones received her preliminary report by owl at 4:30 and has already responded. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement will have a full analytical team working on the scanned data this morning." McGonagall looked back out at the lake. "She also asked me to tell you to eat breakfast and go to your lessons as normal." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Normal." Her word. "While the head of the DMLE is analyzing evidence that someone blocked my magic 26 times. She specifically said," McGonagall's voice took on the precise quality of direct quotation, "tell him to be ordinary today. It will frustrate the people who are watching him for a reaction." Harry sat with that for a moment and then something that might have been a smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. She thinks someone will be watching. She believes that whoever placed those blocks has interests in keeping you from finding out about them. If you change your behavior drastically today, it alerts them. McGonagall looked at him. Can you manage it? Normal. I've been managing something a lot harder than normal for 14 years, Harry said. The flatness was back in his voice. He heard it himself and didn't correct it. McGonagall made a sound that wasn't quite a word but was clearly an acknowledgement of something she found painful. Then she stood, smoothing her robes. Breakfast is in 20 minutes. I would recommend the porridge. It's going to be a long day. She walked away down the corridor. Harry watched her go, and noticed, because he noticed things, that her spine was about a degree straighter than usual. The particular straightness of someone who has decided on a course of action. Breakfast was, as instructed, ordinary. Harry ate porridge. He exchanged his usual morning shorthand with Ron and Hermione. Ron's was primarily enthusiastic about the bacon, Hermione's was focused on a transfiguration essay due next week that she'd apparently been composing mentally during the slow numbers at the ball. Neither of them asked him about what had happened after he'd left the table with McGonagall. He hadn't told them yet. Apollin's advice about ordinary settled on him like a game rule and he was comfortable with game rules. Across the hall, at the Ravenclaw table, Cedric Diggory caught his eye and raised his cup slightly, a gesture of neutral solidarity between champions, the kind of thing Cedric did naturally, being constitutionally incapable of being unkind. Harry nodded back. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was talking loudly about something. Harry didn't listen. He ate his porridge. It was the Beauxbatons contingent that was hardest to be ordinary around. They had their own section of the hall, the French students, a long table near the windows where they sat with their straight-backed Beauxbatons posture and their collective quality of being from somewhere better designed. Fleur was there, in her school uniform rather than last night's silver, and she was in conversation with two of her housemates and not looking at Harry at all. Except for the moment when she was. A brief, level glance down the hall that lasted about 2 seconds before she returned to her conversation. But the look had content, a kind of checking in, the look of someone confirming that the situation was stable. Harry held her gaze for the 2 seconds and then went back to his porridge. Ordinary, he thought. He hated ordinary. He had defense against the dark arts first, which was Moody. Harry settled into his seat and noted that Moody's magical eye, which tracked independent of the real one, was doing its thing, moving through walls, scanning corners, occasionally fixing on someone in the room for a half-second too long before sweeping on. This wasn't unusual. Moody's eye was always doing something. What was unusual was that it fixed on Harry, at the start of the lesson, and stayed there for a full 10 seconds before moving on. Moody was teaching unforgivable curses. He'd moved past the demonstrations and was into theory, into the specific mechanics of how each curse interacted with magical resistance. Harry listened and took notes and participated when called on, because this was ordinary, this was the lesson. But he was also watching Moody. The way Moody moved, the way he taught, there was always something performative about Moody's chaos, something that felt deliberate even when it seemed random. Today Moody was more contained. Quieter. His flask made fewer appearances. Potter, Moody said, at the midpoint of the lesson, without looking up from the board where he was sketching the magical pathways of the Imperious Curse. You're quiet today. I'm listening, Harry said. You're thinking. Moody's magical eye swung around to face him while the real one kept facing the board. There's a difference. Am I wrong to think? The class went slightly still around him. Students who'd spent months learning to stay below Moody's radar recognized someone voluntarily stepping up to it. Moody turned. Looked at him, both eyes, now, which gave Harry his full attention in a way that was physically different from one eye alone. That depends what you're thinking about, doesn't it, he said. Some kinds of thinking sharpen a person. Some kinds just rattle around and make noise. I'm thinking about whether things I've been told about myself are true, Harry said. Moody held his gaze for a moment. The class was very still. That's the right kind, Moody said finally, and turned back to the board. Harry filed that exchange under possibly significant and went back to his notes. The owl came during lunch. It was not a Hogwarts owl and it was not a postal owl. It was a ministry bird, the kind they used for official correspondence, grey and severe, with a red official seal on the letter. It dropped on the table in front of Harry with the officious precision of a bird that understood the gravity of its errand. The seal read, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Office of the Director. Ron stared at it. Harry. Why is the DMLE writing to you? I don't know yet, Harry said, which was true in the specific and not in the general. He broke the seal. The letter inside was short, written in a hand that was angular and purposeful, every letter meaning business. Mr. Potter, the department has received materials pertaining to your welfare that require immediate follow-up. Please present yourself at the Ministry of Magic, Level 2, at your earliest convenience, and no later than 3 o'clock this afternoon. You will be accompanied by a staff member of your choosing. This is not optional. Amelia S. Bones, Director, DMLE. Not optional, Ron read over his shoulder. Blimey. Hermione had gone very still beside him. Harry, she said quietly. What did you do last night? After you left the table? I'll tell you both later, he said. Right now I need to talk to McGonagall. He found her before she found him. She was already moving toward the Gryffindor table from the staff end of the hall, and her eyes met his over the heads of the students between them. She'd received something too, he could tell. A staff owl had arrived at the same time as his. They met in the middle of the hall, which was not subtle, but subtle had apparently concluded its useful life. She wants me there by 3, Harry said. Yes, McGonagall said. I'll arrange the portkey. Find me at 2. He nodded. McGonagall turned and walked back toward the staff table with her increased by a degree spine, and Harry became aware that the entire great hall was watching him. He sat back down and finished his lunch. Ordinary, he reminded himself. He was starting to suspect Ordinary was going to get harder to manage as the day went on. The Ministry of Magic smelled the same as it always had, that particular institutional smell of old parchment and wood polish and something faintly chemical, the smell of large organizations that process a great deal of paperwork about important things. Harry had been here twice before. Both times under circumstances that had not been pleasant. He noted this pattern without particular surprise. McGonagall walked beside him through the atrium and to the lifts, and she'd done something subtle to herself, not quite a glamour but a kind of deliberate presentation, the full professional weight of Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts deployed like a flag. It worked. The ministry employees they passed made way without being asked. Level 2. The lift opened and Harry stepped out and immediately saw that the corridor outside the DMLE was more populated than expected. There were 3 Aurors by the main door, which was unusual. There were also, standing in a cluster near the waiting area, a man in expensive French robes who was very tall and very blond and bore a resemblance to Fleur so strong that Harry knew immediately this was Monsieur Delacour, and beside him, in the organized, purposeful way of a woman who has been working since 4 in the morning, Apollon. She looked up when Harry stepped off the lift. Something in her face changed, relief, quickly contained. You came, she said, crossing to him. You said 3 o'clock, he said. It's 10 to. She looked at him for a moment. How are you? I've been ordinary all day, he said. As instructed. The ghost of something amused moved across her face. Then she turned to McGonagall. Minerva. Thank you for accompanying him. McGonagall looked at the Aurors by the door. Amelia is inside. She has been inside since 6 this morning. Apollon gestured toward the man in the French robes. My husband, Edouard. He came on the first available portkey. Edouard Delacour extended his hand. He was built like someone who played a sport requiring impact, and his grip confirmed it. He looked at Harry with an expression that was direct and not unkind and somehow communicated, "I have heard everything my wife told me and I am forming my own assessment of you, which is proceeding well in about 1.5 seconds. Mr. Potter," he said. "My wife speaks highly of you." "She told me not to thank her yet," Harry said. Edward made a sound that might have been a laugh, a short, appreciating sound. "That is her. Always wait until the work is finished." The DMLE door opened and a young Auror leaned out. "Mr. Potter. Madam Bones will see you now." Amelia Bones looked like the physical embodiment of a person who has not survived 50-odd years of magical government by being easy to dismiss. She was broad-shouldered and close-cropped and wore a monocle that she didn't need for seeing but had clearly learned conveyed useful things about her willingness to look carefully at things. Her office was large and uncluttered in the way of people who process information quickly enough that paper doesn't accumulate. She was standing when they entered rather than sitting, which Harry would later understand as deliberate. Amelia Bones always stood for important meetings because it put everyone on the same physical plane and made clear nobody was being interviewed. She looked at Harry for a long moment. "Harry Potter," she said. Her voice was exactly what her appearance suggested, direct, precise, not unkind. "I've been wanting a proper conversation with you for about 3 years. Circumstances kept making it difficult." She gestured to the chairs. "Sit down, please. All of you." They sat. She remained standing, moving to a wide table along the side wall where a spread of parchment was laid out, charts, diagrams, things Harry didn't immediately recognize. "Mrs. Delacour's scan report arrived at 4:30 this morning," she said, without preamble, along with the encoded raw data from the scan itself. "I had our senior magical analyst, that's Robards, best we have, working on it by 5. He gave me his report at 9. She paused. "I've been in a very specific kind of bad mood since 9. "What did he find?" Harry asked. She looked at him directly. "That everything Mrs. Delacour described is accurate, and then some. The blocks are real, they are deliberate, and we have identified magical signatures on 17 of them with a reasonable degree of certainty." The room was very quiet. 17 out of 26 have clear origins," Apollon said from beside Harry. "Not a question. Confirming. Of the 17, 6 bear the signature methodology of an adult which we have on file. The magical style is consistent with someone trained specifically in compulsion and suppression charms, with a particular fondness for layered work. The kind of thing that looks like a single charm on the surface but is actually 3 or 4 stacked, so that removing the top layer leaves the rest intact." Harry watched her face. "You know who that is?" "I have a strong working theory," she said carefully. "I want it confirmed under authenticated analysis before I say a name in this room. Legal reasons." She moved to the next section of the chart. "Of the remaining 11 we've identified, 2 share characteristics with old curse work. Dark magic, not suppression, but dark magic that has been repurposed, twisted from its original destructive intent into something that suppresses instead of injures. That takes considerable skill. Those 2 we believe are residual, connected to the night you received your scar." "Voldemort," Harry said. She didn't flinch at the name. "Presumably, yes. Whether intentional or a side effect of the curse that night, we can't determine. But they are old and their origin is consistent." "And the other 9? McGonagall asked. Amelia Bones's expression shifted in a way that was controlled but not completely controllable. 3 of the remaining 9 are registered, she said, as Ministry-issued child magical safety restrictions. Coded to your file. The silence was different this time. "Registered," Harry repeated. "Someone put them there officially." "They are in your file as standard safety procedure, yes. Applied when you were placed with your non-magical relatives." She met his eyes. "The authorization signature on those 3 is Albus Dumbledore." The name sat in the room like something physical. Harry heard McGonagall exhale. It was a very small sound and very controlled. 3 from Dumbledore, he said. Keeping track. That leaves 6. Of the remaining 6, Amelia said, we have 2 more with identifiable signatures, different from the previous 6, these 2 are associated with someone at Hogwarts, based on the methodology and the timeframe of their placement. Both were added during your time at school. Our analyst describes the style as, she picked up a page, systematic, personally motivated, and reflecting a practitioner who views the subject as a variable to be controlled rather than a person to be considered. Snape, Harry said. Amelia looked at him. Something moved in her expression. The signature is consistent with what we have on file for Professor Severus Snape, yes. That leaves 4, Apollon said. 4, Amelia confirmed. Unidentified as yet. The signatures are obscured, not naturally, deliberately, using a masking technique that we've seen before but not often. It's sophisticated work. We're still working on it. Harry was doing the arithmetic. 3 Dumbledore. 6 unidentified from the first group. 2 Voldemort residual. 2 Snape. 4 unknown. 26 minus 17 was 9 unidentified. He said as much. 9 remain unclear in terms of origin, Amelia confirmed. Some of those may be the 4 with masked signatures once we break the masking. The others, she shrugged, once, a gesture that was oddly human from her. We'll find out. He sat with the tally. He was doing it to stay practical, to stay in the space where numbers were just numbers, because the alternative, thinking about the fact that there was a list of people who had looked at him and decided to do this, was available to him but not useful to him right now. What happens next? He asked. I filed for an emergency Wizengamot session, Amelia said. Given the evidence we have, I can invoke the International Charter on Magical Welfare of Minors. Mrs. Delacour has already submitted the French Ministry documentation supporting that application. An emergency session means it goes before the full Wizengamot, not a subcommittee. They cannot table it or delay it. When? Harry asked. 3 days, she said. I can get it scheduled for 3 days from now with the authorization I have. Possibly 2 if I apply some pressure. She looked at him steadily. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly, not politely. Go ahead. Are you prepared for what this will become? She let him hear what she was really saying. This will not stay quiet. The Wizengamot session is not sealed. There will be press. There will be people who challenge the evidence. There will be people who are protective of those named and will attempt to reframe this as a number of things. An exaggeration, a misunderstanding, a foreign interference in British magical affairs. She said the last with the kind of precise dryness that meant she'd already heard this argument from someone. There will be significant political pressure against pursuing this to its conclusion. There will be people protecting Dumbledore, Harry translated. She didn't deny it. He has many friends in that chamber. He has many friends everywhere, Harry said. He's been everywhere and doing everything for a very long time. He looked at Amelia Bones directly. I'm not afraid of him. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that recalibrated slightly. Like she'd expected more qualification in the answer. All right, she said, simply. I have a question, Harry said. Yes. The 3 blocks with Dumbledore's signature, the minister-registered ones. What were they registered as, exactly? What was the stated reason? Amelia picked up a different parchment. Protection against premature magical development. Standard notation, placed to ensure the subject would develop at a rate appropriate for his environment and not create a pattern of magical expression that would endanger the secrecy statute. She put the parchment down. Which is a reason that exists in the regulatory code and is technically applicable to a magical child placed with non-magical relatives. But, Harry said. But the code allows for a maximum of 1 such restriction, of specific limited scope, subject to annual ministry review. She looked at him. There were 3. They were never reviewed. And they don't match the technical specifications of the standard safety restriction in any case. They are significantly more aggressive than the code permits. So he filed false documentation, Harry said. He filed documentation that used the correct language to justify restrictions that went well beyond what the language was designed to cover, Amelia said. Whether that constitutes falsification depends on the Wizengamot's reading. It will constitute falsification when I'm finished presenting it, Apollon said quietly, from her chair. Amelia Bones looked at Apollon and something passed between the two women, a kind of professional recognition, the acknowledgement of aligned force. Yes, Amelia agreed. I expect it will. They were in the DMLE for 2 hours. By the time Harry and McGonagall took the Fleur back to Hogwarts, the late afternoon sun was coming in at a low angle and turning the entrance hall amber. McGonagall was quiet on the walk back from the gargoyle guarding Dumbledore's office. Harry noted they were taking a route that didn't pass it, and wasn't sure whether that was deliberate on her part. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the Gryffindor common room. Harry sat down and told them everything. He did it methodically and without drama, because that was how it settled properly, not as something enormous and overwhelming but as a sequence of facts that could be named and examined. Ron's face went through about 6 stages. Hermione asked clarifying questions that were pointed enough to be useful. When he finished, the common room fire was the only sound for a moment. 26, Ron said. He looked like he was trying to fit the number into something. 26 blocks. And you've still been, the things you've done, don't, Harry said, not unkindly. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. Save it for when they're off. Ron looked at him. Something in his face settled, not quite resolve, but the nearest Ron got to it, which was a particular squaring of the jaw. Right, he said. What do you need? Nothing right now, Harry said. In 3 days I need to go to the Wizengamot hearing. I'm coming, Hermione said immediately. You're not invited, Harry said, then, seeing her expression, it's not that kind of, it's a formal Wizengamot session. It's not public seating. I'll find a way to be there, she said, with the finality of someone who has already started working out the logistics. He didn't argue. Hermione finding ways to be places she wasn't strictly invited to was one of the constants of his life. Dumbledore's summons came at 8 that evening. The messenger was a school owl, formal Hogwarts letterhead, requesting Harry attend the headmaster's office at his earliest convenience. The phrasing was gracious. The timing, given the day's events, was not coincidental. Harry looked at the letter. Folded it. Put it in his pocket. Then he went to the window seat on the 4th floor where he'd been that morning and sat there until the castle quieted down. He thought about Apollon saying someone looked at a child and chose to diminish him. He thought about 26. He thought about Amelia Bones standing across from him and asking if he was ready, and the answer he'd given, not performed, not bravado, just the actual truth, I'm not afraid of him. He wasn't. That was the thing that had clarified itself over the course of the day, settling from vague nighttime anger into something with edges. He had spent 14 years with a low-level, constant awareness that Dumbledore knew more than he said and saw more than he showed, and he had responded to this the way you respond to something when you're a child with nowhere else to go, with a complicated mixture of trust and deference that was less freely given than it appeared. He was done with that particular arrangement. He did not go to Dumbledore's office. He went to bed, and this time he slept. In the morning, he found Fleur waiting outside the great hall. She was leaning against the stone wall beside the doors with her arms crossed and the air of someone who has been waiting long enough to have established territorial rights. She straightened when she saw him. My mother called me last night, she said without preamble. She told me about the ministry meeting. About the signatures. All of them, he asked. All of them. Her voice was level but her eyes were doing something complicated. She wanted me to tell you that she will be returning to Hogwarts tomorrow. That she has an appointment with Dumbledore. Harry raised an eyebrow. She's going to talk to him. She is going to give him the opportunity to know that the session has been scheduled, Fleur said. As a courtesy. Not as a negotiation. There's a difference. When my mother does it, yes. A very clear one. She looked at him steadily. Potter, I want to ask you something. You're going to ask it whether I say yes or not, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. How are you actually managing? Not the answer you give everyone. The actual one. He thought about it. I feel like I've been reading a book about myself and just found out the first 100 pages were torn out. He paused. And I want the pages back. Fleur was quiet for a moment. The morning traffic of students began pushing past them into the great hall. You will get them back, she said. My mother does not take things like this on and fail. She said it simply, as a fact. And Madame Bones has apparently told the minister that if he attempts to interfere with the session scheduling she will go to the prophet herself. That's aggressive, Harry said, with something approaching admiration. My mother tends to have that effect on people she allies with. Fleur uncrossed her arms and turned toward the doors. Are you eating breakfast? Yes. Good. You look like you haven't eaten enough since September. She pushed through the door without waiting for a response. Harry followed her, and behind him the castle was waking up, and somewhere 3 floors above them in an office with a lot of moving silver instruments, a very old and very clever man was sitting behind his desk reading a letter from the Ministry of Magic and keeping his expression, carefully, neutral. The hearing was in 2 days. And the castle, Harry thought, was still holding its breath. Chapter 3, The Trial. The Wizengamot chamber was underground. Harry had known this intellectually, he'd read about it in magical law, a history the night before, at Hermione's insistence, but knowing it and arriving at it were different experiences. The lift from level 10 deposited them into a stone corridor that was cold in the particular way of places that have never seen sunlight, and the torches along the walls were spaced just far enough apart that you walked through alternating bands of light and dark. The effect was either dramatic or oppressive depending on your circumstances. Harry's circumstances were specific. Apollon walked on his left. She had arrived at Hogwarts the previous afternoon exactly as promised, had met with Dumbledore for 22 minutes, Harry knew the precise duration because Fleur had timed it, and had come down to dinner afterward looking like someone who had confirmed everything she'd already suspected. She hadn't told Harry what was said. Later, she'd told him. After. Amelia Bones walked on his right, which was unusual, she had explained, briskly, that she would be presenting the evidence personally rather than delegating it, which had apparently caused some procedural friction within the DMLE that she had resolved by the simple method of not caring about the procedural friction. McGonagall was behind them. She had not been required to come and had come anyway. Edouard Delacour was also behind them, alongside a French ministry official named Beaumont who was there in a formal capacity Harry didn't entirely understand but whose presence made Apollon's shoulders settle slightly, which was enough. The corridor ended at a pair of heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bands. 2 Aurors flanked them. Harry looked at the doors and thought about what was on the other side, the full Wizengamot, all 50 members, assembled on emergency notice for a session that had not been on anyone's calendar 4 days ago, and felt, in the place where fear usually lived, something else. Readiness. It was a new sensation. He examined it briefly and decided he liked it. Amelia Bones put her hand on the door. When we go in, she said, without turning around, I will present the evidence first. Mrs. Delacour will present the scanned documentation. You will be asked to take the witness chair. The chair with chains, Harry said. She glanced at him. Yes. It had chains last time I was in a hearing, he said. Is that standard? It is for formal criminal proceedings. A pause. They will not bind themselves unless someone panics and attempts to compel the process. Someone might panic. Someone might, she said, without inflection, and pushed the doors open. The chamber was a circle. That was the first thing. Not a courtroom in the rectangular sense Harry associated with the word, but a circle of tiered stone benches rising steeply from a central floor, and the benches were full. 50 members of the Wizengamot in their plum-colored robes, and every seat occupied. Harry had expected some of them to look surprised to be here. Almost none of them did. They had the careful blankness of people who have had 2 days to prepare their expressions. The chair in the center was high-backed and dark wood, and yes, it had chains on the armrests, lying flat and quiet like sleeping things. In the front tier, arranged with slightly more space than the rest, were the senior members. Harry found Dumbledore's face without looking for it specifically. It was simply there, the way certain things are simply there, the half-moon glasses and the white beard and the expression that was exactly what Harry had expected it to be. Composed. Patient. The expression of a man who has faced adversity before and found it temporary. Their eyes met across the chamber. Harry held the look for 3 seconds and then walked to the witness chair and sat down. The chain stayed flat. A man Harry didn't know, Chief Warlock, presumably, given the central senior seat, called the session to order with a tap of his wand that sent a resonant note around the stone walls. His name was Griselda Marchbanks. Harry would later learn. No, Griselda Marchbanks was the woman beside him, wiry and ancient and looking at Harry with sharp academic interest. The Chief Warlock was Edmund Fawcett, who had the face of someone who had been told this would be straightforward and was beginning to suspect otherwise. This emergency session of the full Wizengamot, Fawcett intoned, is convened under Article 19 of the International Charter on Magical Welfare of Minors, submitted by the French Ministry of Magic and supported by the British Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The matter before this body concerns the magical welfare of Harry James Potter, minor, British citizen, currently resident student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He paused. Madam Bones, you have the floor. Amelia Bones stepped forward. She had a folder of documents under one arm and the bearing of someone who has given difficult presentations before and found the difficulty irrelevant. She opened the folder on the central table and did not glance at it. She'd memorized the contents, clearly, and the folder was for the Wizengamot's reference copies. Members of the Wizengamot, she said, and her voice carried without being raised, 4 days ago I received a heritage scan report from a Fleur Delacour, credentialed Veela practitioner and deputy representative of the French Ministry of Magic. The report documented 26 magical suppressions, commonly referred to as blocks, placed upon Harry Potter's core. These blocks were not placed by the subject himself, were not placed with his knowledge or consent, and were not placed with the knowledge or consent of his legal guardians at the time of placement. The chamber was quiet in the way of a room where 50 people are controlling their reactions. The Ministry's Magical Analysis Division has since confirmed the scan report in full, Bones continued. Of the 26 blocks, 17 have been identified by signature. I will catalogue these by source in order of placement, oldest first. She began. Harry sat in the chair and listened to his own history being read back at him in the precise language of evidence, and the experience was strange in a way he hadn't anticipated. He'd known the numbers. He'd known some of the names. Hearing them laid out one by one in front of 50 people in the formal architecture of accountability was something different, something that had the quality of doors being opened in a house you thought had only a few rooms. The 2 Voldemort residual blocks came first, placed on the night of October 31, 1981, as a consequence of the failed killing curse. Bones described these almost clinically. They were the least deliberate, the least culpable, the product of catastrophic magical violence rather than intention. Some of the Wizengamot shifted slightly. Several were already writing notes. Then she reached the Desley years. The Ministry's records show 3 formally registered blocks applied to the subject during his placement with non-magical relatives, the Desley family of Surrey. Bones's voice didn't change. These blocks were authorized and documented by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Chief Warlock of this Wizengamot and Headmaster of Hogwarts School. Harry heard it, the intake. Collective, controlled, but real. 50 people adjusting their understanding of what kind of session this was going to be. The stated justification was Standard Child Magical Safety Protocol, reference code CMC-4, which permits a single, limited suppression for children in non-magical environments. Professor Dumbledore filed for 3. The restrictions applied do not match the technical specifications of CMC-4, they are significantly broader in scope and there is no record of the required annual ministry review for any of the 3 in the 13 years they were active. Madam Bones. The voice from the senior tier was measured. Dumbledore. Harry had been waiting for it. Professor Dumbledore, you will have the opportunity to respond in full, Fawcett said, from the Chief Warlock's seat. Please allow the presentation to conclude. A beat. Of course, Dumbledore said. Bones continued. She moved through the timeline with the same steady pacing, the entry into Hogwarts, the 2 blocks identified as Snape's work, placed in Harry's first and second year. The methodology on these 2 is consistent with advanced compulsion and inhibition charms, layered construction, designed to be self-concealing. They were placed without authorization and without the subject's knowledge. The estimated effect on the subject's performance in potions specifically, and in magical precision generally, is significant. There was a harder ripple through the chamber at this. Snape had a reputation that extended beyond Hogwarts. Several of the Wizengamot members, Harry suspected, had opinions about it. The remaining unidentified blocks number 9, Bones said. 5 of these are under active analysis. 4 have been masked using a technique that is still being decoded by our analytical team. She looked up from the table for the first time, sweeping the full chamber. What is not in question is the total count, the authenticity of each block, or the fact that their aggregate effect on the subject's magical development and capability has been severe and sustained. She closed the folder. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement is requesting that this body authorize the immediate removal of all 26 suppressions under supervised medical conditions, and that formal charges be brought against the identified parties. She stepped back. Fawcett looked at the chamber. Mrs. Delacour, you have supporting documentation to present. Apollon stepped forward and everything changed slightly, in the way it always did when Apollon entered any space with intention. She had brought a different kind of evidence, not ministry parchment but the raw data of the scan itself, which she projected into the air above the central table using a modified charm that rendered it as something three-dimensional and visible to the chamber. The magical architecture of Harry's core, illuminated, mapped, interrupted. Harry had not seen this before. He looked at it. At the bright core of it, deep gold and complex, at the structure of it that Fleur had described as something very large compressed into a space too small, and she'd been right, he could see it, the compression was visible even to him, the magic folded in on itself in ways that looked uncomfortable. And then the blocks, each one a different quality of shadow, some thick and deliberate and old, some precise and recent, all of them interruptions in something that should have been continuous. He looked at what he was supposed to be. He didn't have words for it, exactly. But it was significant. He could tell without needing to be told. The architecture of it, even compressed, even blocked, had a scope to it that the 50 people in this chamber were visibly registering. Apollon spoke for 20 minutes. She described each block in terms of its mechanism, its effect, its estimated contribution to the cumulative suppression. She was precise, technical, and absolutely devastating, in the way that precision is devastating when it is applied to something that should not have happened. When she finished, she looked at the chamber with the specific expression of a woman who will not pretend the numbers are ambiguous. The subject has been functioning at an estimated 15 to 20% of his natural magical capacity, she said. Since infancy. Fawcett called a 10-minute recess before opening responses. Harry stayed in the chair. He didn't feel the need to move. Several of the Wizengamot members looked at him during the recess with expressions that ranged across the spectrum from discomfort to calculation to something that might have been guilt, and he looked back at each of them without any of the reflexive downward glance he'd spent his whole life deploying in the presence of authority. He was the person this had happened to. The chair was the right place for him. Across the chamber, he saw Dumbledore in quiet conversation with 2 senior members. Whatever he was saying was being received with the gravity appropriate to a man of his reputation and track record. Harry watched it with interest, the way you watch a chess game when you already know what the board looks like. Amelia Bones appeared at his elbow. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," he said, then, remembering, "actually fine. Not the other kind." She nodded once. "Dumbledore will present his explanation during the response period. I want you to be prepared for it to be coherent." "I know it will be," Harry said. She looked at him. "You're not surprised by any of this?" "I've been surprised," he said. "I had 2 days to move past it." "The chair doesn't usually suit 14-year-olds, she said. "I've had practice," he said, and her expression did something brief and complicated before resetting. The recess ended. Fawcett called the chamber to order. "Professor Dumbledore," he said. "You have been named as the authorizing party for 3 of the identified suppressions. You have the floor to respond." Dumbledore stood. And this was the thing Harry had been waiting for, the thing he'd told Amelia Bones to prepare for, because Albus Dumbledore standing before 50 of his peers and making an argument was not nothing. It was, in fact, a considerable something. The man had presence in the way mountains have presence, not because they are aggressive but because they have been there longer than everything else and the landscape has shaped itself around them. He didn't look flustered. He didn't look defensive. He looked, if anything, like a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has made his peace with the weight. "Members of the Wizengamot," he said. His voice was warm and deliberate and measured in a way that was its own kind of authority. "I will not dispute the technical facts as presented by Madame Bones. The blocks exist. 3 of them carry my authorization. These are facts. Quiet. What I ask this chamber to consider," he continued, "is the context in which those decisions were made. In the autumn of 1981, I placed Harry Potter with the only blood protection available to him, his mother's sister, Petunia Dursley. The blood wards that anchored themselves to that home were, and remain, the most powerful protection against Lord Voldemort accessible to us. They required Harry to be present. They required him to be safe." He paused, letting the word settle. A magical child of Harry's lineage, exhibiting significant spontaneous magic in a non-magical household, would have drawn attention. Would have created patterns of unusual activity detectable to those who were, at that time, still seeking him. The restrictions I placed were, in my judgment, necessary for his survival. The chamber received this. Harry watched the faces receiving it, the nods, the slight shifts, the expressions of people working out whether necessity excused method. "In my judgment," Harry said. Every face in the chamber turned to him. Including Dumbledore's. His voice had come out completely level. Not raised. He hadn't planned to speak, Amelia had not told him to speak, Apollon had not cued him. But the phrase had required a response and the response had simply come. "In your judgment," Harry said again, looking directly at Dumbledore. "You decided, on your own, that the right response to a baby being in danger was to cut that baby off from most of his magical potential and then maintain that condition for 13 years. Without review. Without informing the ministry beyond the minimum required to file the paperwork." He paused. "You didn't tell me. You didn't tell my guardians. You didn't tell McGonagall." A shorter pause. "Did you ever plan to remove them?" The question sat in the chamber like a stone dropped in still water. Dumbledore looked at him. And Harry, who had been watching this man's face for 4 years, saw the exact moment, very brief, very controlled, but real, when the composure had to be actively maintained rather than simply existing. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice was genuine, which was the most complicated part. "Everything I did was in service of your survival. There are larger forces at work that, you're not answering the question," Harry said. "The question of removal was always contingent on, were you planning to remove them?" Silence. It was not the silence of someone gathering a response. It was the silence of someone who has run the responses and found none of them adequate. "No," Dumbledore said finally. Quietly. "Not while the threat remained active." "Not while Voldemort was a threat," Harry said. "So, not while I needed my full power. The power you'd blocked." He watched that land. He watched it land in Dumbledore's expression and in the Chamber's expression and in Amelia Bones's very still face and in Apollin's steady gaze. "The logic," Harry continued, "is that I needed to be kept limited so that I didn't attract attention or get overconfident or step outside the plan, whatever the plan is. And the blocks helped with that. Kept me manageable." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "How am I doing?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was exactly as it had been, warm, measured, carrying the weight of his certainty. "You are, as you have always been, a young man of remarkable character. I have only ever tried to protect you." "I know," Harry said. And he meant it, which was the complicated part from his end. "I know you believe that. That's not the same as it being true." Griselda Marchbanks, at the front of the senior tier, made a sound that was not quite a word. Fawcett tapped his wand. "We will proceed with structured responses. Professor Dumbledore, your response is noted for the record. Professor Snape," he looked at a different part of the senior tier, "has been summoned. His testimony will be heard in absentia pending his arrival." "Snape isn't here?" Harry asked Amelia quietly. "He was summoned yesterday," she murmured back. "He sent a written response claiming the evidence was fabricated." A pause. "Which did not go over well. He called the ministry's own analytical team liars. In more diplomatic language, yes. I imagine that went over well." "Madame Marchbanks used a word I hadn't heard from her before," Amelia said. "And she's 97. The session ran for 5 hours. 5 hours of testimony, counter-argument, procedural motions, 2 breaks, and the specific extraordinary experience of watching 50 of the most powerful magical politicians in Britain be forced, methodically and without exit, to confront something they would have preferred to examine another day. The arguments against prosecution ran broadly in 2 directions, that Dumbledore's intentions were clearly good and that intention should mitigate culpability, and that the scale of the blocks might be overstated given the complexity of Veela scan methodology. The second argument died quickly when Amelia produced the ministry's own analysis confirming every number. The first argument ran longer and was harder to kill, because the intentions were clearly good, or clearly something close enough to good that the distinction required very careful language. Harry answered questions from 7 different members. He did not perform distress. He did not soften his answers or add qualifications to make the chamber comfortable. He answered each question with the specific texture of someone who has had 2 days to reach a clear view of what happened to him and is not confused about it. When a member named Thickness asked him whether he felt the blocks had materially harmed him, he said, "I don't know exactly what I would have been without them. But I know that I stood in front of a basilisk at 12 with a broken wand and mostly luck, and I'm supposed to believe that's the best I could do. So yes. I think they harmed me." When a member named Umbridge, small, toad-faced, wearing an extraordinary number of pink items, asked whether he thought it possible that the blocks had been genuinely protective and that he was simply too young to understand the larger picture, Harry looked at her for a moment. "How old do I need to be for someone to decide what happens to my magical core to require my consent?" he asked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. He waited. She did not ask another question. The crucial vote was not on removal, that passed 73-4, the 4 being people whose institutional loyalties were apparently stronger than the evidence. The crucial vote was on whether to open formal criminal proceedings against Dumbledore. 37-22. Not a landslide. The Dumbledore loyalists had done their work. But a majority was sufficient, and when Fawcett announced it, Amelia Bones's expression allowed itself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction before resetting. Dumbledore received the vote with the same composure he'd held all day. He would face a formal hearing. He would almost certainly not be removed from Hogwarts immediately. The motion for immediate suspension failed. But formal criminal proceedings meant formal scrutiny, and that was not nothing. Snape would face a separate hearing. His absence was noted. His written response was formally registered as unhelpful. 2 members of the Wizengamot had specifically requested that his Hogwarts teaching credentials be reviewed. The blocks would be removed within a week, under supervision by a team of healers and cursebreakers assembled from both the British and French magical services. Harry stood when Fawcett closed the session. His legs were fine. He'd expected them to be shaky and they weren't. The chamber was emptying around him, people filing out in clusters of urgent conversation, the political machinery already starting to reprocess what had happened and decide what it meant. Apollon was beside him before he'd taken 2 steps from the chair. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him with the expression, and this time he had the word for it, finally, having spent enough time with her in the last 4 days to catalogue it properly. It was the expression of someone who has been right about something they badly wanted to be wrong about, and has made their peace with being right, and now intends to correct it. Amelia will schedule the unblocking for 5 days from now, she said. St. Mungo's, private ward. I will be there. Okay, he said. You did well today. You did most of the work. Yes, she agreed, without false modesty. But you sat in that chair and you were present. That is not nothing. Many people would have made themselves small in that room. I've been small enough, Harry said. She looked at him. Then she put her hand on his shoulder, not the polished social gesture of their first meeting but something deliberate, solid. Yes, she said. You have. McGonagall appeared on his other side. Her expression was arranged but her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't quite tears but was the nearest she'd come to them in his experience. Mr. Potter, she said. I believe there is a great deal to discuss. There is, he agreed. And I believe several things need to change at Hogwarts, beginning immediately. Her voice was iron again, but it was iron with direction now. I intend to have words with the headmaster this evening. You will not be present for them, but I want you to know they will happen. What will you say to him? Harry asked. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. I will say what I should have said when I left you on a doorstep in 1981 and walked away telling myself it was for the greater good. She straightened. I will say that he was wrong. And I will say it where he can hear it, which is a thing I have not done enough. Harry looked at her. That's enough, he said. She nodded once. The 3 of them walked toward the doors of the chamber, and behind them the Wizengamot was still buzzing, the machinery of British magical law grinding reluctantly through a recalibration it hadn't anticipated, and above them the ministry was carrying on in all its large institutional momentum, and somewhere in a stone corridor that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries, the first real accountability in a long, long time was settling into the walls like the cold. Fleur was waiting in the corridor outside. She had not been permitted into the session. She had been in the corridor, apparently, for most of 5 hours. There was a very empty cup of tea on the bench beside her. She looked at Harry. Well? Criminal proceedings against Dumbledore, he said. 37-22. She absorbed that. And Snape? Separate hearing. His teaching credentials are under review. The blocks? Removed in 5 days. Fleur looked at him steadily for a moment. There was something in her expression he recognized from the night of the ball, not quite the recalibration he'd seen then, but a development of it. Like someone who had expected a particular version of a situation and had received a better one. Good, she said. Then she picked up the empty cup, stood, and fell into step beside him as they walked down the corridor, and didn't say anything else, and somehow that was exactly right. Chapter 4, The Unblocking St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries occupied a building that had been pretending to be a closed department store on a London high street since 1833, and it did so with the kind of commitment that suggested the building itself had internalized the performance. Inside, it smelled of dittany and fresh linen and something else, something sharp and magical that Harry associated with the specific kind of clean that only existed where a lot of healing happened. The private ward on the 5th floor was not the usual St. Mungo's experience. No lime green healer robes rushing past, no waiting patients clutching various afflicted limbs, no distracted Medawitch asking you to fill out a form in triplicate. The private ward was 4 rooms off a single quiet corridor, and it had been cleared for today's procedure with the specific thoroughness of people who weren't sure what today's procedure was going to produce and had decided to err on the side of space. Harry arrived at 8 in the morning with McGonagall and found Apollon already there, which surprised him, and then didn't surprise him at all. She was in conversation with a man Harry hadn't met, tall, weathered, with the particular quality of someone who has spent a lot of time underground. Bill Weasley, Harry would shortly discover, had been pulled from his posting in Egypt by a direct request from Gringotts' liaison office, which was itself responding to a request from Apollon's husband, who knew the right people at the French ministry, who had connections to the British Cursebreaker network. The chain of favors was long, and the fact that it had been assembled in 5 days said something about Apollon's specific kind of relentless. "Mr. Potter," Bill said, extending his hand. He had a long red ponytail and an earring and the easy confidence of someone comfortable with complicated dangerous work. "Bill Weasley. I've heard a lot about you. Good things from Ron, hopefully." "Ron mostly talks about Quidditch and food," Bill said. "I got the rest from the briefing documents." Which were, he chose his word, substantial. "The Cursebreaker team is 4 people, Apollon said, moving them forward. Bill leads. He has worked on core suppression before. The blocks from Egyptian curse work have similar architecture to some of yours. The other 3 are French, from the team I used when," she paused briefly. "When similar work was needed in another case." Harry looked at her. The pause was specific enough to ask about. "Another case," he said. "A child in Lyon. 3 years ago." Her voice was level. 7 blocks. Placed by a parent who wanted a squib rather than a magical child for reasons that were their own and were entirely wrong. A pause. "We found them in time. She is 9 now and very much herself." Harry thought about that for a moment. He thought about how long Apollon had apparently been paying attention to this particular category of harm. "How many cases have you found?" he asked. "In my career, counting yours." She looked at him. 11. 11, he said. "Yours has the highest count by a significant margin." He absorbed that. He'd done enough absorbing in the last 5 days that the mechanism was getting practiced. He filed it and moved on. The room they'd prepared for the procedure had been modified from a standard St. Mungo's private room into something more functional. The bed was centered and raised, the standard monitoring equipment had been replaced by instruments Harry didn't recognize, and along the left wall there was a full array of magical diagnostic equipment that glowed softly in primary colors. Apollon's scan equipment occupied one corner, already active, cycling through a low-level monitoring hum. The healers were 2, a senior healer named Strout who had the look of someone who had seen most things and remained unruffled, and a younger specialist named Avery who had apparently written her thesis on core restoration and was managing her professional excitement with limited success. "Right," Bill said, closing the door. He addressed Harry directly, which Harry appreciated. Some of the adults in the room had a tendency to conduct the briefing at chest height, talking about him to each other. "I want to explain what we're going to do, and I want you to ask questions as they occur to you, not after." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Harry said. "The blocks don't come out like stitches. You can't just pull them. Each one is integrated into your magical architecture to a greater or lesser degree. The older ones especially have had 13 years to weave themselves into how your core processes magic. So removal is," Bill moved his hands, approximating something, more like realigning than extracting. "We find the block, we identify its anchor points, we dissolve the anchor points in sequence, and the block dislodges. Then your magic fills back in. Like pulling a dam out of a river," Harry said. "Exactly like that." And like a river with a dam removed, there will be a surge. That's expected. That's why we have the room set up like this. Bill gestured at the monitoring equipment. The surge is manageable 1 block at a time. We're not doing all 26 today. Harry frowned. How many today? We start with the most recent and least integrated, Apollon said from her corner. The ones placed during your time at Hogwarts, Snape's 2, and 3 of the more recent unidentified ones. 5 today. If you handle the surge well, we can schedule another session for next week. 5, Harry said. It is not a small number, Bill said. I want to be clear with you, this is going to be uncomfortable. Not painful in the way of an injury, but, he looked for the word. Overwhelming, Healer Avery offered. She had a quill and parchment and was clearly restraining herself from taking more notes than was strictly necessary. Overwhelming, Bill confirmed. Your magic has been operating in a compressed state. When the blocks come off, it doesn't trickle back in. It rushes. And the castle, Apollon added. You will be in a controlled environment here, not at Hogwarts, which is, a brief pause, fortunate. St. Mungo's shields are calibrated for magical surges. Hogwarts wards are more reactive. She means Hogwarts might have noticed, Healer Strout said, in the voice of someone who has been waiting to contribute. Harry looked at her. Noticed how? The castle is semi-sentient. Old magic in the foundations responds to significant changes in the people who live there. Strout shrugged one shoulder. If we did this in the Gryffindor dormitory, you'd likely rearrange the furniture. Among other things. Right, Harry said. St. Mungo's it is. He sat on the bed. It was high and the room felt very deliberate around him, all these people and their instruments and their careful preparation, and he thought about how the opposite of this was a cupboard under some stairs, and the distance between those 2 points was enormous and largely unfair. He sat with that for a moment and then set it aside, not because it didn't matter but because it didn't matter right now. Who's first? He asked. Snape's, Bill said. They're recent, they're relatively shallow, and we know their signature well enough to work quickly. He picked up his wand. The French cursebreakers, 2 women and a man whose names Harry had been given and had immediately scrambled, arranged themselves at specific points around the bed in a triangle configuration. Lie back. Harry lay back. Close your eyes if it helps, Bill said. Or don't. Some people find it easier to watch. I'll watch, Harry said. Thought you might. Bill said it with the slight smile of someone who had expected exactly that answer. The first thing was warmth. A deep, specific warmth at the center of his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room and everything to do with something being done to the architecture of him. Harry watched Bill's wand movements, controlled, precise, nothing like standard spellcasting, more like conducting, like the wand was a tool for directing something already in motion rather than initiating it. The French cursebreakers were doing something at the periphery of his awareness, a kind of low resonant magical pressure that he couldn't see clearly but could feel, the way you feel a sound below hearing in your sternum. Apollon's instruments began making sounds. Soft, measured, information sounds rather than alarm sounds. I've got the first anchor, Bill said quietly. It's attached to your precision center, the part that handles fine motor spellcasting. Which explains why my potions were rubbish, Harry said. Your potions are technically fine, Bill said, working as he spoke, the multitasking of someone comfortable with his hands. Someone just made sure you couldn't access the part of you that would make them not fine. A pause. Okay. On 3, I dissolve the anchor. You'll feel something. Don't fight it. What does fighting it look like? Tensing up, closing down, going rigid. Don't. All right. 3, Bill said, and didn't count down. The block came off. It was not like anything Harry had a reference for. The warmth that had been gathering in his chest expanded, not painfully, but vastly, like taking a deep breath after a long time of shallow ones, except the breath was internal and structural and everywhere at once. His fingers spread flat on the bed automatically. His magic, which he'd always experienced as a kind of low background hum, jumped a register. The instruments along the left wall spiked. "Good," said Healer Avery, too quickly, then with more composure, "that's exactly what we expected." Harry lay still and let the surge pass. It took perhaps 30 seconds, a rush of something enormous that had nowhere specific to go and distributed itself through him looking for space, finding it, settling. When it settled, the precision warmth in his chest remained, but it was ordinary now. Baseline. The new baseline. "How do you feel?" Bill asked. Harry thought about it. "Like I've been breathing through a straw for my whole life and someone just removed the straw." Good analogy. Bill was already repositioning. Second one. This one is attached to your instinctive magic, the automatic responses. Which is why your accidental magic as a child was inconsistent rather than constant. Harry guessed. Constant, yes. A child your age with your core should have been leaving a trail of uncontrolled magic events everywhere he went. Bill's voice was matter-of-fact. You had some. You should have had considerably more. Harry thought about the Dursleys. Thought about how they'd talked about his freakishness like it was the exception rather than the rule. Thought about what his aunt and uncle's lives would have looked like if he hadn't been partially suppressed. He thought about whether that was why Dumbledore had done it, and reached the same place he kept reaching, that the reasons were real, and the damage was also real, and neither cancelled the other. Ready? Bill asked. Yes. The second removal was sharper. The instinctive magic rushing back was less like breathing and more like a reflex restored, a snap of something coming back online, a set of responses that had been muffled behind glass abruptly gaining clarity. The instruments spiked harder this time. One of the French curse breakers said something quietly. Apollon responded without looking up from her monitoring array. What did she say? Harry asked. She said your ambient field just doubled, Apollon translated. Which is normal for this stage. It doubled and we're only on 2, Healer Stroud observed, with the tone of someone recalculating. He is a Potter, Apollon said simply, as if this was sufficient explanation. Based on the healer's expression, it apparently was. The third block was one of the unidentified ones. Bill approached it more carefully. He spent 5 minutes mapping its architecture before touching the anchor points, and Harry lay there and watched the ceiling and felt the strange awareness of someone doing precise work on the interior of him. It was intimate in a way that had no social parallel. This one is interesting, Bill murmured, half to himself. Interesting how? The construction, he paused. I know this style. I've seen it before. A longer pause. This was placed by someone with Gringotts training. The room was quiet for a moment. Someone who trained as a cursebreaker, Harry said. Or had access to the methodology. The layering is specific, it's a Gringotts technique for vault suppression, adapted. Bill's voice was careful. I'll flag it for Amelia Bones's team. Who else uses Gringotts methodology? Harry asked. Legitimate cursebreakers, primarily. And, Bill stopped. And? Harry said. And people who've worked closely with them over a long period. People who've had time to study the methodology without formal training. The implication sat in the air between them without needing to be said. Bill's expression was doing the thing of someone who had arrived at a conclusion they found unpleasant and was deciding how to handle it. Take it off, Harry said. Bill took it off. This one came away with a sound that wasn't audible in the conventional sense, it was more a feeling of sound, a resonance that Harry felt in his teeth and his ribcage and the space behind his eyes simultaneously. The surge was larger. The instruments across the left wall didn't just spike, 3 of them moved to the edge of their calibration range before pulling back. Healer Avery wrote something down very quickly. Harry sat up. He hadn't meant to. His body decided to sit up as if in response to a signal, some proprioceptive insistence that vertical was necessary right now. His hands were flat on the bed on either side of him and the room felt different. The quality of the air was different. Not the air itself, but his relationship to it. His awareness of the magic in it. The monitoring instruments, the diagnostic array, the subtle enchantments on the room's walls, he could feel them all like a new set of teeth. "Lie back down," Healer Strout said. "I'm fine. You're at 3 of 5 and your ambient field is currently pushing against our shields. Please lie back down." "The shields are fine," Harry said. He wasn't being difficult. He was genuinely assessing, the way you assess your footing on uncertain ground. The magical awareness that had opened up with the third block was something he was actively mapping. "He's right, the shields are holding," Bill said, looking at Apollon. Apollon was watching Harry with the specific attention of someone whose instruments were telling her one thing and whose instincts were telling her another. "How do you feel?" "Like the room is smaller than it was," Harry said. Then, trying to be more precise, "like I've been looking through a keyhole and someone just opened the door. Everything is the same but I can see more of it." She nodded slowly. "2 more," she said. "Can you continue?" He lay back down. "Yes." "Don't be brave," she said. "Be accurate." "I'm accurate." "Continue." The 4th block was the second of the unidentified ones in today's set. Bill mapped it quickly, similar architecture to the 3rd, same Gringotts methodology, placed approximately a year later. Harry wondered, while Bill worked, whether they'd been placed in sequence. Whether someone had come back. Whether coming back meant having access, which meant being at Hogwarts or being trusted enough to be at Hogwarts, and whether Dumbledore had known. He stopped that line of thought. Later. The 4th removal was the hardest so far. It came away fighting, which was Bill's word for it. The anchor points had integrated more deeply than the others, and Bill had to work through each one individually while the French cursebreakers maintained the containment field. Harry lay still and breathed and felt the block resist, felt the magic around the anchor points clinging to the architecture it had occupied for 2 years, and there was a specific unpleasant sensation, not pain, but wrongness, like a splinter being worked out from deep tissue. Then it let go all at once. The surge that followed was not quiet. The monitoring instruments hit their limit. All of them. A sound like a soft chime from Apollon's array, indicating calibration adjustment. Healer Avery made a sound that might have been an expletive quickly converted to a professional noise. The lights in the room brightened briefly and then settled. Harry's magic was everywhere. He was aware of it in a way he never had been before, not the background hum, not the straw-breathing bassline, but something active and present and large that was moving through the room the way a tide moves through a harbor. The instruments registering it. The shields of the room pulsing against it. The magical signatures of the 7 other people in the room illuminated to him like lit windows in a dark street. He looked at his hands. They looked the same. "Harry," Bill said. His voice was even and professional. "I need you to bring it in." "What does that mean?" "Pull it back toward you. Imagine it, the magic. Imagine drawing it back, compressing it." Harry tried. This was the wrong instruction. The magic didn't compress, it moved, it responded to intention rather than force, and the intention of compression felt like the wrong shape of thought. He tried something else. He thought about the room. About the specific dimensions of the space. He thought about the walls and let the magic find them as a boundary rather than fighting against them. It worked. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but the ambient field pulled back a degree. The instruments eased off their upper limits. "Good," Apollon said quietly, watching her array. "That was well done." "One more?" Harry asked. Silence. "One more," Bill confirmed. The 5th block was the second of Snape's. Harry knew this before Bill said it, because when Bill's work reached that part of his core the sensation was different from the others, recognizable in the way an accent is recognizable, a methodology he'd already felt removed once. Snape's second block was attached to something in his magical instinct that Harry, after the third removal, had a new ability to sense. It was attached to the part of him that had always known more than he'd been able to access. The part that had felt what was wrong but been unable to precisely articulate it. The part that, in every defense class and every duel and every moment of crisis, had been working around an obstacle. "This one is interesting in a different way," Bill said. "How so?" "It's not suppressive in the same sense as the others. It's directional. It doesn't block your magic from functioning, it redirects it. Takes magical instinct and routes it away from strategic awareness." Bill was quiet for a moment. "Whoever placed this one didn't want to make you weaker. They wanted to make you less certain. Less confident in your own read of a situation." Harry lay very still. "They wanted me to doubt myself," he said. "Consistently and persistently," Bill said. "Yes." The rage was there. It had been there since the morning after the ball, since Apollon had first named what she'd found, but it had been managed rage, the useful kind, the kind Fleur had told him to keep. This was a hotter version of it, localized and specific, and he breathed through it because rage at the wrong moment was the wrong shape of thought. "Take it off," he said. Bill took it off. The fifth removal was the largest surge of the day. The lights didn't just brighten, they flared, brilliant and sharp, before the hospital's stabilizing charms brought them back. The monitoring instruments all moved at once and two of the French curse breakers stepped back half a pace, not from the procedure but from the wash of magical ambient that pulsed outward from the bed. Healer Strout went flat against the far wall, not dramatically but practically, creating distance. Healer Avery, to her credit, didn't step back at all, she stepped forward, trying to get a better reading, which said something about the quality of her academic commitment. Harry sat up again. This time he didn't lie back down. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room, and the room looked back at him differently. He could feel the hospital around him, floors and floors of it, the magic of healing embedded in the walls, the wards on each room, the monitoring systems that ran through the building's foundations. He could feel 7 people in this room, their magical signatures distinct and specific. He could feel Bill's signature, warm, steady, technically precise, the signature of someone comfortable with complexity. He could feel Apollon's, strong, layered, the deep shimmer of Veela heritage woven through with disciplined magical education. He could feel McGonagall's through the door at the end of the corridor where she'd been waiting for 3 hours, sharp and fierce and tightly controlled. He could feel the specific absence where the 5 blocks had been. Like the river, he thought. Like exactly that. "How many?" he said, and his voice came out a register lower than usual, not performed, just physically different, coming from somewhere with more space behind it. "How many remain after today?" 21, Apollon said. She was looking at her monitoring array and then at him alternately. Her expression was doing something complicated. "Of which 17 have been scheduled for removal over the next 3 sessions." "4 sessions total," Harry said. "Yes. Next session is in 7 days, we will attempt 7 blocks. Then another 7. Then the final 7. She looked at him. "How do you feel?" "Larger," he said. Then, more precisely, not physically. "But, yes. Larger." He flexed his right hand. Nothing happened visibly. But he felt the magic in his fingers with a clarity that was new and specific and made the last 14 years feel very far away and very much like something that had happened to someone else. "We should have you tested," Healer Avery said, controlling her excitement slightly less successfully than before. "Your outputs, baseline readings before this session were in the 70th percentile for your age group, which was itself remarkable given the blocks. Now," she looked at her parchment, then at him, then at her parchment again. "I'd like to take new baseline readings." "After rest," Apollon said firmly. "After rest," Avery agreed, backing down immediately. "Can I do something?" Harry asked. Everyone looked at him. Anything specifically? Bill asked. My wand, he said. He reached for it on the bedside table, and Bill handed it to him. It was 11 inches, holly and phoenix feather, and it had been his since he was 11 and had always felt right. It felt different now, not wrong, more right, like a tool being held with the correct grip for the first time. I want to try something. Controlled, Apollon said. It wasn't quite a question. Very controlled, Harry said. He pointed his wand at the empty monitoring chart on the far wall, the one healer Avery had been marking during the procedure, and cast Wingardium Leviosa. The most basic levitation charm. First-year work. The chart leapt off the wall. This was not unusual. What was unusual was what happened next. The charm extended, effortlessly, to every other loose item in the room simultaneously, the parchment stacked on the side table, 3 empty potion vials, healer Avery's clipboard, and with an audible hum, the small monitoring instruments along the left wall which were bolted down but vibrated urgently in their fixings. Harry cancelled the charm. Everything settled. The room was very quiet. I was only trying to lift the chart, he said. Yes, Bill said. I know. His tone was one of respectful appreciation. Your precision control hasn't caught up to your new output yet. That'll come with practice. He looked at Apollon. You were right about the Potter lineage. I am usually right, she said. Then, to Harry, this is why we do it in stages. If all 26 had come off at once, the building, Harry said. Parts of it, she confirmed. He set his wand down on the bed beside him. He looked at his hands. He thought about the basilisk at 12, about the dementors at 13, about the tournament tasks, about every time he'd barely managed something and attributed it to luck or stubbornness or the specific magical assistance of other people. He thought about all the times Dumbledore had looked at him over half-moon glasses with that particular expression of fond, knowing patience, and he thought about what that patience had been protecting. I want to say something, he said. Not to anyone specific. To the room. Everyone waited. I'm not angry at magic, he said. I'm not angry at any of you. He stopped, looking for the precise word. I'm reclaiming something. And I want to be clear about what that is. It's not revenge. It's not about proving anything. He looked up. It's about, this being mine. This has always been mine and it was taken without asking and I'm taking it back and that's all it is. Apollon was looking at him with an expression he'd seen once before, when she'd said it is not all right, and I would like you to stop pretending it is. The expression of a woman who has been waiting for someone to arrive at something, and they've arrived, and it's enough. Yes, she said. That is exactly what it is. McGonagall was in the corridor, as sensed. She stood up from the bench when Harry came out, and she looked at him with the careful assessment of someone who is visually confirming a number of things simultaneously. Whatever she saw, it satisfied the assessment, because something in her face settled. Successful? She asked. 5 down, he said. 21 to go. She nodded. She fell into step beside him. They walked toward the lift. There is something I need to tell you, she said, in the careful tone of someone who has been holding information during the procedure and has decided not to hold it longer. What? Dumbledore knows you were here today. I expected him to know, Harry said. He came to my office this morning. Before I left. McGonagall's voice was measured. He wanted to discuss whether the procedure was, she chose her word, advisable at this stage. Whether the timing was appropriate given the tournament. He wanted to delay it, Harry said. He wanted to discuss the implications. Thoroughly. Her jaw did the thing. I told him the scheduling was not his decision. He said, she paused, he said that he hoped I understood the larger picture. That there were forces at work which made Harry's, she stopped again. Limitedness useful. Harry said. McGonagall was quiet for 3 paces. He said your situation was more nuanced than it appeared. Those words specifically. Right, Harry said. I said several things in response to that, McGonagall said. Some of them I am not prepared to repeat. The substance of what I said was that the Wizengamot had voted, the procedure was authorized, and that if he had concerns about my conduct he was welcome to raise them through whatever channels remained available to him. A pause. Given the proceedings against him. Harry looked at her profile. How did he take that? He was gracious, she said, with a quality in her voice that made the word cut. He is always gracious. That is the thing about him. She looked straight ahead. He genuinely believes he is right. And he is kind and he is gracious and he is almost certainly the most brilliant wizard alive, and he used all of that to keep a child diminished because it suited his plans. And the part that she stopped. The part that you find hardest, Harry said. The part that I find hardest, she said, is that I trusted him. For 40 years. Not blindly, I am not a blind woman. But I trusted him as a colleague trusts someone they believe shares their fundamental values. And she stopped walking. They were at the lift now, and she pressed the button and looked at it rather than at Harry. He asked me once, very early on, to trust him on the subject of you specifically. And I did. And I should have, McGonagall, Harry said. She looked at him. You're here now, he said. Her jaw worked. Her spine did the extra degree of straightening. Yes, she said. I am. The lift arrived. They stepped in. There is one more thing, she said, as the gates closed. Sirius Black. Harry looked at her sharply. What about him? Amelia Bones has reopened his case. Quietly, at this stage. She was waiting for, McGonagall chose her words, an appropriate moment to push on certain matters. The evidence against him was always thinner than the conviction would suggest. With the current attention on certain people's decision-making about you specifically, she believes the climate is favorable, Harry said. Her word was less resistant than usual. McGonagall allowed a fraction of something that might have been satisfaction. She has people reviewing the original trial documentation. Or rather, the documentation confirming that there was no original trial documentation. Harry was quiet as the lift moved. He wasn't tried, Harry said. He was not. He went to Azkaban for 12 years without a trial, Harry said. The flatness was back. Like everything else, someone just decided. McGonagall said nothing. There was nothing to say. Harry looked at the lift gates and thought about Sirius in a cave somewhere living on rats, thought about Sirius at 12 transforming on a moonlit ground, thought about I wanted to die with you in that house, and now I'll be with your father, and felt something in his chest that was entirely different from the block removal surge but just as vast. I want him cleared, Harry said. I know, McGonagall said. Not eventually. Soon. I know, she said again. And with the weight you're beginning to carry, Mr. Potter, the attention, the momentum, the rather extraordinary things that happened in that ward today, she looked at him, and her eyes were doing the bright thing again, soon is not impossible. The lift opened on the ground floor. The department store pretended to be a department store around them. Harry walked through it and out into the London street, and the ordinary grey sky was above him and the ordinary city was around him, and 5 things that had been wrong with him were now right with him, and he was larger and less straw-breathed, and the city felt different under his feet, not changed, but closer, the way everything comes closer when the keyhole becomes a door. His phone, Hermione had made him carry one for emergencies, a spare of hers loaded with 3 contacts and a lot of worry, buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it. A text, which meant one of exactly 2 people. How did it go? Hermione had written. And don't say fine. He typed back, 5 down. 21 to go. Something happened with a levitation charm. Tell you tonight. The response came back in 11 seconds. What kind of something? He put the phone back in his pocket and walked toward the portkey point at the end of the street, and behind him St. Mungo's kept pretending to be a closed department store, and somewhere in Scotland a castle was going about its daily business unaware that the boy inside it was becoming a noticeably different quantity than he'd been this morning. He thought about the third task. 6 weeks away. He thought about what 6 more weeks of unblocking looked like. He thought about Tom Riddle's diary and the Chamber of Secrets at 12, at 15% of himself, barely managing it, and what barely managing it looked like as a starting point rather than a ceiling. He decided soon was not impossible at all.